Hey everyone, time for part 2 of our website series. This is where we go through the payload website template. Out of the box, you get everything that you see here. And I'm going to just go through every single aspect of this website template and explain it to you in detail to show you how everything works. And this is part 2. Part 1, we just went over at a high level all the different bits and pieces. But in this video, I want to focus on the rendering pipeline, how everything is rendered, how we go from content over here over to React components in Next.js on the front end. I'm going to show you pages, posts, forms, going to show you how these things all play together. And to get started here, I just started a brand new create-payload-app. So I ran this one command, and then I followed the prompts, so I gave myself a project name. I chose the website template. I chose which database I'd like to use, and again, I used MongoDB here just because I've got it running. SQLite might be an option for you as well if you want to just get something up and running, but you don't have a database connection to use. And then I'm done. So I've got it running over here with pnpm dev, and here is the folder structure. So this is just payload out of the box, right? Just exactly how the website template comes. Last video, I kind of mentioned that there's a lot of pieces here, but it's all here for a reason. Because if you're building a big website, you're going to need redirects, you're going to need forms, you're going to need pages, you're going to need on-demand revalidation, you're going to need static rendering, you're going to want live preview like this. And so everything here comes out of the box. And it's my goal to kind of teach you about how all of the different pieces work together. So payload, as you probably know at this point, especially if you watched the first video, it's really just Next.js. So next dev, that's what we just ran. And then there's next build here. And then there's next start. And let's go look at how all this plays together. So the payload config, I kind of went over that in a high level on the last video. So you should definitely start there, but I'm going to talk about some new things on this video. So don't feel like you have to watch that first video. But this template comes with these 5 categories and then a bunch of plugins installed. So we have like the redirects plugin, we have the nested docs, blah, 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 all these plugins. But these 5 are our like custom collections of documents. And so if I save that, I show you this, we go over to the admin panel, and there's going to be a couple different collections here. So we've got pages, posts, media, categories, users. Then we also have redirects, forms, form submissions, and search results. I want to start this by looking at pages. Now, pages are pretty versatile in nature. They have dynamic structures, and it's not like a blog post where it's kind of just like one column of text that just goes. You want to have more of a versatile layout. So like you have the hero here, and then you have the layout builder, where this is like a content block. This is a media block. This is a posts archive. So you can pull in the most recent 3 posts and pop them on the home page if you want. And then you have a call to action, and then of course the footer. And the way that this is built is not on a template basis. If you come from WordPress, you might be familiar with like page templates. That is not what this is. Rather, we want to make it more expressive so that editors can create very dynamic page templates on demand by mixing and matching different blocks in different orders. And if you break down your layout into like vertical chunks, so like this being a vertical chunk, this being a vertical chunk, this being a vertical chunk, blah, 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 then your editors can mix and match these components into different orders. So you see like I have the call to action down here. I can just drag and drop this, and now it's in the middle. Drag and drop it down to the bottom. I can delete it if I want by just removing it. And then editors can add and create pages at their discretion using a bunch of Lego blocks that you gave them that are all highly branded and deliberate. And this website just comes with these first 5, right? These are kind of example blocks. You don't need to keep these blocks in your code. You can delete them if you want. But really, it's up to your design system to define the blocks that you use. And our own website is built like this. Our website is open source as well. It's a big website, so there's a lot of moving pieces. Maybe not the best place to start if you're learning. I think that the website template is the place to start if you're learning. But this right here is on that same type of layout block mentality. So this is like a layout block. This is like a logo grid. Here's a layout block, which is like a big featured image. Here's a layout block, which is kind of like a sticky highlight. Well, I don't even know what we called this one. Then we have a slider. Then we have this little feature that I can click on these different things and see the different features. Then we have a content block with a couple calls to action and then the footer, right? And so our own website uses this exact same structure that we've got in the website template here. And you can use this structure to build a very, very wide array of different types of pages. So for example, you go here, this page looks completely different than this one, right? Well, it's the same principle. This is one page in Next.js, like the page template, and you can use these blocks and then kind of arrange them into very, very versatile different shapes here, all with this same principle in mind. So like obviously this layout is completely different than the home page, right? Well, it's not a page template. It's a bunch of layout blocks. So let's look at that from top to bottom. How does that look in our website template and what's involved in making that happen? So the first thing I want to start with is the payload config for this pages collection. So with payload, you define how you want payload to work. And I've got pages here. You can see we've got access control set up. I've got a couple of things for population. I'll get back to that in a second. You have admin, some customization, implementing live preview, implementing preview. Those we'll cover in a different video. But the important part is the schema. Like what kind of fields do I get to control if I'm creating a page? So I have a title field here on a page. I have tabs. And then the tabs have a hero tab, a content tab, and a meta tab. And each one of those tabs has their own fields associated to them. And then I have a couple more fields at the bottom, published at, and then a slug field for like the slug, the URL field. I've got hooks, I've got versions configured. These fields right here. So you've got three tabs, right? Hero, layout, and meta. Well, that is right here. Hero, content, SEO. We kind of broke them out like that so that it's a really easy editing experience. So that if your editor comes here and they know they want to change the hero, well, put that stuff in a hero tab. If they want to change the content of the page, so all this stuff down here, then put that stuff in a content tab. If they want to manage the SEO, put those SEO fields in an SEO tab. Just clean it up for them. Make it simple. It would be kind of messy if you put all those things vertical on this page. You can design out the way that you want the payload admin panel to work using our fields. And payload has a lot of field types. If you go to the docs, we have, I think, 20 some field types. So if I scroll through here, you can see we have array fields, blocks fields, which is that block-based layout builder, checkboxes, JSON code, blah, blah, blah. We have a ton of them. And it's up to you to use those fields to create your editor interface and to actually save the data of the page. These fields influence what comes out of payload APIs. It influences how the data is saved in the database. It influences the shape of everything in payload, the admin panel, everything. So by just defining these fields here, you're going to be set up to create the entirety of all of this that you see here. And from there, your editors can use these fields to publish pages, right? So, I mean, this is kind of our suggested approach. We like to break out the hero and the content. And just to be super clear, what I mean by hero is this first thing on the page. I didn't name it that. I have no idea where that came from. I guess it like does a lot of work. It's responsible for capturing your attention, hence hero. I don't know. I don't care. But down below that is the content. That's where the content, the layout starts. And I could change this hero type to change the way that the first thing on the page looks, right? So low impact is just a headline. Medium impact is kind of puts the image below. And then high impact up here. You can add more heroes. That's the first thing that I think we want to look at in the payload config side. Like this is a hero field. We've imported it from here at heroes/config. So we can go heroes and we go to config. And you can see here's some more fields. We have a type, the hero type right here. This type has a couple different like options. It's a select field. By default, it will be set to the low impact hero right here. But you can choose which type of hero you want to show. And then depending on which type of hero, your front end can render the React component for that hero type. So we actually have a component that maps to this hero type. We have a React component that maps to this hero type. And we have a React component that maps to this hero type. And then from there, you can show and hide different fields using payload conditional logic to, like for example, we only show the media field if the hero that was selected is either high impact or medium impact. If I can show you that in the browser real quick. High impact, we've got the media field. Low impact, the media field goes away because it's not relevant to that low impact hero. It doesn't show. So conditional logic allows us to toggle that field on and off based on what we've selected here. Medium and high still have the media field, but low, it goes away. And so you can build really versatile like hero patterns. To take that to the extreme, here's a website built on payload. This is a hero style, operates with the same principles that I just showed. I go into a page, here's another hero style. I go into another page, I don't know, let's go here. Here's yet another hero style. All these different hero styles are wired up, and so that the authors can choose these hero styles and then on demand build a very versatile conversion funnel or whatever they're trying to do with their website, but they have full control. And so heroes, that's just the first thing on the page. And then we have content. I'm going to show you how this works on the front end right after this, but so that first tab has that one group field and pages here. This is the pages collection again. Here's a tab for the hero. That corresponds to this tab right here. And then all these fields inside of it, this is a group field, and we imported that from a different file. So it's a group field called hero. And here you go. Here's all the fields on that group type. Right? Pretty simple stuff there. Let's go back to the pages collection again. So here we are on the pages collection. And then the content tab is here. And the content tab just has this one layout field, right? And that one layout field, if I look at that, here it is, layout. And we've got a couple blocks tied to this layout field. So this is the block-based layout builder where we have 5 different blocks registered, able to be used. I can show you that. If I click on add layout, here's the 5 blocks that I have available to create my pages. I could register another one easily. Like I don't like how ESLint is taking my spaces out. I like these spaces. But I could add another block just like going like this. Slug, my new block, fields. And then we can name is content, type is rich text. Now I have another block. And then that's going to be instantly exposed. You can put this in another file as well. You see how I've got these 5 here. It's kind of best practice to put these files or these block configurations in their own files. So I've actually got like a blocks folder. I'm not going to save this because I don't want to use that right now. But we're actually importing these. Those come from the blocks folder. So if I go over to the blocks folder, here's my blocks. And so I can see here's the call to action block. Here's the config for the call to action block. I just export it and then I re-import it in the pages collection for use. But by centralizing that, you can really keep your payload configs really clean and really easy to manipulate and navigate around. And so with that, this is kind of like giving your editors those layout like Lego blocks to build with. And then it just becomes a matter of how do we render those in a concrete way on the front end. So let's look at how this comes together on the front end. Here's the hero, obviously, layout blocks. Let's follow this through from top to bottom, because so far really all we've talked about is how to generate the payload side of things. You could think about this as like the data source, the back end, the structure, the data that you're going to save. But now let's look at how to actually render that. So I'm going to close all my files, close up all the folders. Let's go to source. This is a Next.js app, right? So all of payload runs here, the whole thing. You don't need an account. You just go. This is a full self-contained repository with everything you need. Payload mounts its admin panel and its API here. And then your front end runs in this folder, coincidentally called front end. And if we're rendering pages, right? If we go over here, you can see I'm on the home page. If I click on contact, well, now I'm on /contact. And so the routing structure of Next.js means that when you click, like, here we go. There's two pages. Number one, here's the home page, right? So just like slash, right? This is root. And you can see we're importing the page template from this /slug/page, and then we're just re-exporting it. That's it. We're importing the generate metadata and the page template, and then we're just simply re-exporting on this home page. This is not in a folder. You see, this is at the root of the front end. So this is the home page, but then all pages in the ./slug should also render this exact same page template. So this is actually where all the code goes. This is the page template that is responsible for rendering this stuff here, like pages. So slash, that is the same. Contact, that's the same template. They don't look anything alike, right? These two things look very different, but it's the same Next.js route. We're just exporting it and we're reusing it in this other file. So it's kind of clean, because it would be kind of a bummer if we had to duplicate all that. The home page is built with the same structure as all other pages. And so this file has a bunch of stuff going on. It imports a bunch of stuff, and then I'm going to just describe all of this to you from top to bottom. I think the first thing that I want to describe, though, is the page itself. So this is what renders the page content. Line by line, the first thing, we have params. And params is a Next.js construct that gives you whatever gets filled in with this slug parameter here will show up on the params. So params.slug will be whatever the user enters here. So for example, if I go to contact, params.slug will be contact, right? And so I get that here. And you can see we're defaulting it to home. So if there is no slug, then just assume that it's home. And the reason is because this right here, remember that this component, this is a React component, right? This React component is reused for our home page. So if there is no slug coming in from the params, then we know that it's the home page. And what we're doing here is we're creating the URL. We're adding a slash because, like, if the slug was just straight up contact, well, the URL is actually /contact. And the first thing we're going to do, now that we know what page is being requested here, we can go query that page by the slug. And, you know, slug is a weird word for this. I don't know why it's called slug. I think it's a remnant from WordPress, ripe for renaming. But we're going to query that page, and we're going to get the data from the CMS for that page by that slug. So let's pretend that this was contact, right? Slug was contact, like I showed you over here, contact. So we want to go query the contact page from the CMS. So this function, we've actually got this in the same file, I believe. It's maybe down at the bottom. Query page by slug. We're using Next.js, or we're using React Cache to deduplicate this, so that if we had to run this multiple times to generate this page, which we will have to do, and I'll show you that, then React helps us and says, hey, this function was called twice for the same request. We only really need it to be called once, so let's just cache that for the second call. And the reason we're using cache here is because we need that page, we need the data for the page in two places here. Yes, we need it for this page React component that actually renders the page, right? We're calling it here, but we are also calling it in the generate metadata function, right? We're calling it here because we need the metadata from that page. Remember how in payload I kind of showed you that there was SEO here? Well, this is metadata, right? In Next.js you would use that for generate metadata. So I need this contact page or this home page in two places. I need it here and I need it here. And so we just abstracted it out into a function, and we wrap it with React Cache, which comes from React, just like that. Now we're going here, we're all happy, we're going to get one page. Of course, this is typed, this is payload we're dealing with. It's fully typed. You get end-to-end type safety just out of the box for free. But what this query page by slug does, it takes an argument of slug, and that's going to be a string, right? So when we query page by slug, we got to pass it the slug that we want. And we're going to do a couple things. Number one, we want our website to support preview and draft mode of Next.js, which is a great Next.js feature. It allows logged in admins to be able to preview the newest copy of that page. Hey, if you're in draft mode, I want the newest copy of this page available. But if you're not in draft mode, if you're a public visitor of the site, you should get whatever's published, right? So we're going to get draft mode. We're going to say, hey, are we in draft mode? Yes or no? And then we're going to do this right here. And we're going to get payload. This is the way that you initialize payload. You say await, get payload, and then you pass it your config. And so there's a couple things here. Import draft mode. So that comes from Next.js, draft mode. And then we have get payload, which comes from payload. Import get payload from payload. And then finally, we have our payload config. Because if we want to get payload, if we want to get a copy of payload to use to query, then we need to pass payload our config. And the config is actually a promise right here. We import that right there. You don't need to call it config promise. You could just call it config if you want. Like, sure, just like that. But really, it's up to you. I like to just kind of keep that as config promise, because if you tried to access something from that, it's going to be a promise. You have to await the config promise if you want to access something from it. And so if I show you this, build config, we're exporting build config. We're calling this function. This function is going to return a promise. You see that? When you call this function, it returns a promise that has the sanitized config, but you need to await that. Luckily, get payload does that for us. So here, I can get payload by saying await get payload and pass it the promise. And there we go. Now we've got payload, which is running and it's able to query for us. So what we're doing here, when we want to get a page by a slug, we're going to say, hey, payload, find pages. Are we in draft mode? Yes or no? This is a Boolean, right? So are we in draft mode? Okay, if we're in draft mode, then get this page in draft mode. So give me the newest copy. If we're not in draft mode, give me whatever's published. And now we're going to limit this to 1. We only want 1. Really, there should never be more than 1 page with the same slug. We have that set to being unique. So you really can't have more than 1, but we just like to specify that. Generally, payload is going to be preparing some like pagination data. So like, for example, how many pages did we get? I know you only asked for 1, but how many pages are there total here? Well, in this case, we don't need that information. Payload would perform another query to see how many pages we get returned if we're calling payload.find, but we don't need that information. So I just say payload or pagination false, which makes this query more efficient. Now, override access, this is a property that says to payload, hey, should we respect your access control? Yes or no? Should we care if a user is logged in or not? Yes or no? And override access, what that does is it says to payload, because we're querying our database directly here, we are on the server. This code runs on the server, so it is secure. And payload, the local API, by default, assumes, hey, if you're running this on the server, then we know that it's you, because some strange user can't get access to the server to run code. So yeah, don't worry about it. Now we're going to set override access equal to draft. So if draft mode is false, then we're not going to override the access. You can think about this as like a flag to turn the access control on or off. So if we pass true, then we're going to say, hey, disregard our access control. This is me. So if it's a draft, if you're in draft mode, hey, we want to disregard access control. Give me whatever you got. But if draft is false, then override access will be false. And that says, hey, we're a public user here, so we need to respect the access control that was set on the payload config. And so, for example, if I show you collections, pages here, access control for payload is very powerful. Too much to go into for this video. But read, you can see read access control for pages is set to say you need to be authenticated, or you can read published documents only. And so this is a function. We've got it in a separate file. I'm going to show you that quickly. You can see that this is a very simple function that says, okay, here's the request, and here's the user that's logged in. If there's a user logged in, then yeah, they can read every page. If there's a user logged into payload, then they can read every single page. But if there is no user logged into payload, then return a query constraint that says, hey, non-logged in users can only read pages where status is equal to published, which means that public users cannot read drafts. They can only read published pages, which is kind of like a nice security mechanism. but it's very simple to do in payload, right? So this is effectively going to say, hey, if we say override access false, well, it's only going to give you back published pages. But if override access is true, then it's going to give you whatever you want. And finally, this one last piece on this payload.find is the where query. You can think about this as like filtering. So I want to filter the pages that payload returns by saying, hey, give me only pages where the slug field equals the slug that we were asking for. So give me pages where slug equals contact in our example. And then of course, result is going to be a paginated type because it's going to have like, hey, how many pages did we find, blah, blah, blah. Even though we've disabled it, it will still return the same shape because of TypeScript. You don't want this shape to change. And so that right there, we have result.docs. We want to get the first one, or we return null if we didn't find anything. So we're going to return the first document that gets returned, or we're going to return null. And then we use that right here. So you can see here, that's a page type. And then we're going to use that here to get the page data. And this is going to be JSON. So effectively what we're going to get here is this JSON data for the page. It gives you everything exactly how you defined it. You see a lot of rich text here, but really it's pretty simple and clean. And it's going to give you everything that you need to render the page. So that's kind of fetching the required data, right? You don't really need this part. In the last video, I deleted it. We could probably delete it as well. Basically, if you visit your website before you actually have a home page, then it's going to show the static home page data. If there is no page that has been matched, then we're going to run this through the payload redirects function. This is a component. And what this does, because in payload, we can set up redirects right inside of the admin panel. So I can go over here, I can look at redirects. We don't have any redirects, but I could say, hey, if you get to the page like my non-existent page, hey, if we hit this URL, let's go over to google.com, right? So this is a new redirect. If we go to this URL, it's going to send us here instead. Well, we got to handle that on the front end, right? And so what we do, if we didn't find a page, then we're going to render payload redirects. And we're going to check there. We're going to say, hey, this was a 404. So do we have a redirect? Should we send this to someone else? And that's why we've got this URL up here, right? So we know the URL is /contact. So then what this redirects component is going to do is it's going to say, okay, let's go get the redirects. We cache them. So we get all these cached redirects, all of them. We're saying limit 0. We're fetching all the redirects, but we don't want to call this all the time. We want to call it only once. And so we cache it with unstable cache here. This will probably be updated to use the new use cache directive, but right now it's just cache. So we go get the redirects and then we loop through them and we say, hey, do we have a redirect that matches here? If we do, and it's got a valid to URL, then redirect to that to URL. Otherwise, if we have a reference document, so there's two ways to make a redirect. You can do an internal link where I can select like the contact page, or I can specify a custom URL. So if it's a custom URL, then redirect to that custom URL. But otherwise, if it's a related page, then we need to redirect to that page. And we first need to go get that document. So that's going to say, hey, we've got a page or a post, and we need to go fetch that page to see where we actually send it to. So you can see, like, if it's a page that we chose over here, like internal link, if we choose a page, then we know to go to /slug. If it's a post, well, then we need to go to /posts/ the name of the post, right? So if you look at the URL up here, /posts, and we click this, /posts, and then here's the slug. So they're kind of formatted differently, so you kind of have to handle that. Like, what kind of document did you get? It's a page? Okay, then send it to just /slug. But if it's not a page, then we send it to the slug of whatever kind of collection it is, relation to, so this will be posts, and then it will send it to the slug of that as well. And then finally, if there is a redirect URL, then send it there. So we're kind of binding the redirect URL in these different cases here. And then we're sending it there. So we have to handle those redirects. This comes out of the box. You really kind of have to set this and then you can forget about it. But that's pretty boring stuff. Finally, we're at the fun part, which is React. I think that's one of the points of this website template is that you don't want to wire this up yourself. Just let us do it for you. And we're going to monitor this stuff and we're going to keep it up to date. This is a good redirects pattern because it statically caches the redirect responses. So it's not super expensive. And it's built to be optimized when you deploy to Vercel and things like that. But here's the time where we actually go get our data from our page. Because at this point, we know we have a page, right? We would have returned this. But now we know we have a page, and it's the page type. It's all typed, so I can hover over this. Boom, here's my hero. Here's my options. Everything is all typed really nicely. The layout, it knows what blocks we have registered. It knows it's an array of these blocks. It's a union of all these block types, but it's an array. It has many blocks. So then we go to render. So we wrap everything in an article with a couple Tailwind classes here. And then we go look at this page client real quick. This basically just sets the header theme because, for example, this template has light and dark mode. And so we need to know on the client side, is the theme light or dark? And so this is just like a little utility that uses our header theme. We've got a provider here that stores that. So if you needed to render a component differently based on if you're in light or dark mode, you can use this, which basically just stores the theme. And it exposes those things through React context so that over here, I can say, oh, we're going to set it to light by default. And that's it. So that's kind of a really simple one there. This is a server component. This whole thing is a server component, which is why we can use the payload local API. That local API, this get payload, payload.find, this is a server-side only thing, which is why this up here, this is a server component. It's best practice to use server components until you have a very good reason to do something on the client side. So this being a server component, everything here is just going to be rendered on the server and that's it. But the client component here needs to have an effect. So this is like kind of a self-contained tiny little client component there. Now, the thing about these redirects, if we don't have a page, well, we need to check to see if there's redirects. But even if we do have a page, if somebody publishes a redirect that says like, hey, I don't want to delete the contact page, but if anybody goes there, send it to get started or something. We need to do the same thing for redirects as well. Now this component here is pretty cool. I think I showed this earlier on in this video, but I can actually go and see live preview. As I edit the site, I'm going to see those changes take place immediately on the front end. And so this live preview listener is what's responsible for re-rendering the content when things change, right? So you can see as I'm changing this, it's instantly re-rendering. Well, this is really cool. By rendering this one component, we only want to do it if we're in draft mode, because this really isn't necessary unless you're in draft mode, right? But if you are in draft mode, then we're going to render this component. This component is also a client component because we need access to the router. And what this does is we pass the router to our payload live preview component. This comes from payload/live preview React, payload live preview. We pass it router.refresh because we're going to refresh the whole page every time this component gets an alert that some data has changed from the payload admin panel. And we also need the server URL because we only want to trust events that come from this server URL. So we've got two things here, but this component takes care of everything for us. It's gonna, the way that it works, this is an iframe and it listens to events that the parent window posts to this iframe. So when I make a change and the form state is updated, payload says, hey, website, check it out. I just got an update. Here's some new data. You should refresh your router and get new data. And what that does, we only want to trust those post message events from this server URL here. And that's it. So just with this one line, you can set yourself up to use live preview. Now there's a couple more things that are pretty cool here. And that's pretty much it at that point for this page template. You've got the render hero component, which is going to be responsible for rendering this. And then you've got the render blocks, which is going to be responsible for iterating over all these layout blocks and outputting the corresponding block to the page in a React component. And this is dynamic. Again, this is not a template. So we've kind of got two components. One handles this, and it's going to say, okay, what type of hero am I? High impact? Okay, render this component. Am I medium impact? Okay, render this component. Am I low impact? Render this component. But then the content is going to map over that array, and it's going to output blocks for each one of these. So going back over here, you've got the hero component. You can see that we're spreading this object. This is an object, and it's got a bunch of props. And so we're spreading that hero into this component. So let's go check that out. I'm going to command click on it. You can see here this is a very simple React component. It's got kind of like a map of all of our heroes that we've got available to us. So if we wanted to add another type, a hero type, I would say my new hero type, and then pass it my new hero type component or whatever. Obviously that's not real yet. But you keep this map. And so we type this component. This is a React component. We type it with the props of the page hero. So it knows that these props are the same type as we have from payload. Again, payload does give you all of those types. You don't have to do anything here. I can just go to payload types. I can look at the page, and here's the hero. Payload gives you all of this. You don't have to write this from scratch. Payload will generate it for you. And so we're importing that page type from here. And then we're selecting the hero key off of that page type right there. And now props is typed to exactly what we're passing it over here, which makes it bulletproof. Because if I wanted to say like, this, let's be more explicit, isn't real. Like TypeScript is gonna not let you do that, right? It's a very, very big safety blanket. Having end-to-end type safety is gonna make your applications better. So what we're saying here, we know this type is gonna be none, high impact, medium impact, or low impact. That's exactly how we have it defined over here. TypeScript. If there is no type, if somebody didn't set it, or if the data is corrupted or something, or if the type is none, we don't have to return anything, so return null. But if type does exist, then we can go grab the proper hero to render from the type. So we go up to this map and we say, hey, I've got a type. It's either high impact, low impact, or medium impact. Give me that hero to render. We have one more safety mechanism here to say if somehow someone corrupted the data or something, which is impossible because payload does validate things for you. If someone somehow corrupted the data or used this component incorrectly and passed it some junk, well, then just return null. But finally, if we do have a hero to render, if that was legit, then we render it and we just spread the props. We spread all these hero props into that hero to render, and then we let this component do whatever it needs to do. So for example, let's look at the high impact hero, this one. So go here, right? This is the React component that renders the high impact hero. It does a couple things. It's a client component. It's going to set the header theme to dark because this component has a background image that needs that header to be dark. I'm going to guess that the medium impact does not have that. Yeah, because the medium impact hero doesn't put text over top of an image like that. It just puts it like this should be a white background if you were in light mode. But this one, we need to enforce that it's dark mode, right? So the high impact hero, we go back over there. We're going to set that header theme to dark. And then we just output the content. So we're using Tailwind. We're defining all the styles here. We're rendering the rich text. We're mapping over the array of links, and we're outputting a UL for the links. And then for each link, we're outputting a component that we have called CMS link. And then finally, we're outputting the media. If we have media, we're going to output the media. So there's kind of three different concerns that this hero has to solve for. I mean, outside of the Tailwind CSS, like how to actually style it and design it, I don't even know how this works. I hate Tailwind. I don't hate it. I'm not interested in learning about what that means. Not going to lie. I know how to write CSS. I don't know how to write that. Someday maybe I'll become less of a grouch. But today's not that day. So let's forget Tailwind for a second. We have rich text. We have the CMS links. And we have the media. Well, here's the rich text. We got to output that here. And then we have the links, which are here. We have 2 buttons. I'll put those here. And then we have the media, which outputs into the background. And so we like to have like reusable components. So everywhere that I need to render rich text, I'm going to use this component. And there's going to be a lot of places where I need to render rich text, like this is rich text. If we go back to the home page, this is rich text. This is rich text. This is rich text. So having one component there for rich text that can just take that data and just render it out, that's key. So if we have rich text, then render that rich text component. If we have an array of links, then map over the links and render that CMS link. If we have media, render the media component. And let's go through those one at a time. So like this component's pretty straightforward. The beautiful part about React, and I think most of you probably are very familiar with this, is that everything is component based. This high impact hero, its sole job is to make this thing look good. So if you have a problem with this component, you know exactly where to go, right here. And then the rich text component, this thing, its one job is to make sure that this text looks good. Same principles over and over. So what we're doing here, we have a custom React component. We've got a couple different things here. We've got the props defined. We're getting the props out of here. And this one has rich text without blocks. So it does look like we probably have a couple rich text blocks. We're using some packages from Payload to do this. And this looks like a lot of code. It's not really that hard. But basically what we have is converters. So Payload gives you converters to take the HTML or to take the JSON of rich text. Like this is what Payload's rich text looks like right here. It's JSON, which is great because you might not always need HTML. Sometimes you might want to output your text as just raw plain text. Sometimes you might want to output it as Markdown. Sometimes you might want to output it as JSX. And so by storing the JSON here and making it easy to render, then you can write very, very explicit rich text here, but the way that it's stored is versatile. And because we're using React on the front end, we're going to use the JSX converter. And so what we've got here, we've got the JSX converters from Payload Rich Text Lexical. We give you everything you need. We have default converters here, meaning that we take care of the H1s, we take care of the H2s, we take care of the paragraphs, the ULs, the HRs, the bold, the italic, all that stuff you don't need to do. You just need to tell us your custom blocks that we don't know about. Because rich text in Payload is very, very versatile and extensible. So if I show you kind of like what the pages or the posts look like, we've got custom rich text blocks here. I've added a banner so that if I go over here and I show you what this post looks like, this doesn't come out of the box with Payload, nor does this one. These are custom. You can take this concept and run with it very far, but you need to manage those blocks. You need to render those yourself. So you can see we have a node, which is a rich text node, and then we pass it to the code block component that we have that should render the code component. Call to action, the banner. This one's pretty simple. Let's look at this one. So we need to tell our JSX converter how to take that JSON of the rich text that I showed you and convert it into our React components. So like I showed you here, this is a banner. This is a custom component. Well, the banner, we have a component for. We know the node, we know the fields, we know the banner. I can go in here and it's going to render the data that we need it to render from our rich text JSON. And so it's kind of like a component that we match it up. So just showing you that real quick. This banner right here is this. It's got 2 fields, style and then the rich text. I can change this to like a warning and then preview it. It's going to be orange now. Change it to error, red, success, blue, info, gray. So what are we doing over here? We've got the style. We know what options we have. And we render a different thing based on what the style is. And then finally, we render that rich text. And that rich text is right here. Right here. So you do have to, if you're using this is kind of an advanced feature of Payload, but if you are using custom blocks in your rich text, you need to kind of tell us how to render them. So we have these JSX converters, and then we just render that here. And then you're done. So that's kind of the principle there. It's actually not as hard as it looks. I think if you kind of get into it, you'll be able to see. We're just spreading the default converters. We're spreading the link converter, and then we're showing how to render our blocks. And then this function here will take that rich text JSON and render it out. Okay, let's see. What else should we go through? Rich text comes from here as well. So you can import it directly from Payload. That's a component that you don't need to write yourself. You don't need to write this. You just need to pass us your converters. And then you can put class names on it, etc. So next up, let's look at the links. You're going to map over the links, and then this is, of course, all typed as well in Payload. And those links are just fields, right? So if I go over to Pages, go to Home, let's look at these links. This is kind of a nice structure to use for links in the CMS because you can link to internal links or you can link to custom URLs. So I could link to another page or I could link to a fully custom URL. I could specify if it's opening in a new tab. I fill out the custom URL and then I add the label. And I can choose the appearance as well. Because if I wanted to render buttons or something, well, I've got to be able to specify what style of button, right? So I could do outline. Now they're both outline. I could do 2 white buttons if I want. I could flip that one to default as well. But you kind of need to choose what the rendering style is of these buttons. And so then we map over those links and we return CMS link. And CMS link is a simple component. It takes that link type here and it's going to render what type of component it needs to render. So if it's inline, it's going to render just a regular old link, a Next.js link. But if it is a button, if it's not inline, so I think appearance, if we hover over that, yeah, it's going to have a bunch of these different types. If it's not inline, then we're going to render a button. We're going to pass it the size, the variant, the class names, and then inside of that button, we're going to put our link from Next.js. And that's pretty easy, right? We do have to build out the href, kind of like in those redirects. You know how in those redirects, when I showed that earlier on in this video, you have to tell your front end, is this a page that we're linking to? Okay, then go to /slug. Is this a post? Okay, there you have to go to /posts/slug. And so that's kind of what this is doing here. If it's not equal to pages, then we say, okay, go / whatever it's related to, posts/slug. And so you just kind of build up that href and then you can pass it. If the href is incorrect or if it's not valid, then we just say return null, don't render it. That's a pretty simple thing though. Having this component be centralized into one place means that as you build different types of nav structures, you can change that href structure in one place rather than having to change it in a bunch of places. But really it's, you output the link. If it's an inline button or an inline CMS link, I should say. And if it's not inline, then you output the button. But that's a nice little handy dandy reusable CMS link right there. Then finally, we have media. So just like we have a component to handle links, we have a component to handle media. And it's really nice. You're starting to see that if you can like put together these like pieces, then you can use these pieces everywhere and really move quickly throughout the development of your application. And we give you these pieces from a starting point. So you probably don't have to do a lot of this yourself. You can just use this template. You're going to obviously want to make your website look a lot different. That's fine. But you can use these pieces because a lot of this is kind of the same no matter what you're doing. So having this boilerplate here is going to help you. Finally, though, media. So let's go into this media component. what we're going to do here is we're going to say, hey, this media component can render both a video and an image. So what we're going to do, we have is video. Okay, we have a resource. The resource comes from the props, which is in, let's see, where's props? /types here. So here's the props for this component. And resource is going to be a media type or a string or a number, because it could be an ID or it could be a full populated media document from payload. And to be explicit, what I mean there is we have a media collection, and this is a media document. So if I go to the API, here's the shape. We've got the ID of the media document, we've got the alt text, we've got the file name, we've got the MIME type, we've got the file size. All this stuff comes from the API. And then we can use that stuff to render the media document. So I'm going to close. Man, I'm getting crazy. Let's go here. Okay, this is where I was. And then we were in media. Okay, so we're going to say, hey, does this resource's MIME type include video? Okay, then it's a video. Otherwise, it's an image. And you can see MIME type, resource.MIME type, going back over here, MIME type. So this does not have video. This is an image. But if you uploaded an MP4, well, we're going to want to render that differently, right? So if it's a video, we're going to output the video media component. But if it's not video, then we're going to output the image media component. So video media, right here, it's going to return HTML5 video. It's going to have the source and all that stuff to the media file name. But if it's an image, we're going to do some pretty cool stuff. First, we're going to do a placeholder blur, and we're going to output, we're going to look at all the file sizes that we have, right? Because we have a lot of different sizes. You could see that this template comes with lots of different predefined sizes that we can render for different purposes, right? You could also just use the Next.js component to do this, but what we do is we grab the sizes and then we render it out here with sizes. So that basically we create the Next.js image component sizes from the breakpoints that we want or from the props. But breakpoints, as you can see up here, we have different breakpoints defined as our CSS variables. So here's some different common breakpoint sizes. So we're going to map over those, or if the component had overrides, we're going to map over those as well. And then we're just going to create this string. So this is not really payload, this is more Next.js, but you can specify Next.js to output and resize automatically different sizes of your image for different screen sizes. And that's pretty much what that is. Cool. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's pretty much it for the render hero. Each one of these heroes has different components. So low impact doesn't have the media, doesn't have the links, it just has rich text. Medium impact has all three of those things, but they're output in a different order, right? Media is just below with the medium impact, but in the high impact, media is going to be absolutely positioned behind everything. So you can kind of position things differently. You can do whatever you want. And having these kind of as their own React components in this one folder is kind of handy there. Okay. So that's the heroes. Now let's look at blocks. Blocks are very similar, probably a little bit more simple actually. So if I go to blocks, it's very similar to how we had the heroes. We have kind of a map and we have different blocks for different component names. And I think you can see where this is going. All we do, first we check and see if we have blocks, right? Now this is going to be typed again. So if I hover over this, we know the types. But first we just need to do some sanity checks. Like, hey, do we have blocks here? Do we have more than one block? Okay, then let's go. Let's output them. But if we don't, just return null. Just kind of like a safety check. So if we have blocks, we're going to output a fragment. And then we're going to say blocks.map. And then here we have the block. And we know it's one of these 5 blocks. And we have the index. So 0, 1, 2, 3, it'll output that as we go. We're going to use the index as the key. But the block is the actual magic here. So we have that block, and we have the block type. And you can see the block type, TypeScript knows that it will be one of these 5 block types. So if we have a valid block type, and that key exists in our map up here, then we know we have the block. Honestly, I think this might be overkill here, but it's fine. So we grab the block to render, just like hero to render, like it's basically the same thing as we did over here. We say hero to render, and then over here we say the block to render. We're going to output a div, and then we're going to output that block component from this map and spread the props of the block. And so I think Paul actually, this doesn't show. I think Paul wrote a TypeScript expect error. You can, if you want to do this in a fully type safe way, you would have to write a switch case, I think, here, which is overly verbose, and I think it's not worth it. So we just flattened this into let's just pretend that doesn't exist. And then we have the block component. And that's really all there is to it, to render, to map over those blocks and to render each one of these blocks. But then each block component itself is responsible for rendering its own fields. So for example, the media block is going to have different fields than the call to action block, right? So we're just pulling this right from the payload types, but the call to action block is very simple. It just has links and rich text, right? So if we look at that over here, we go back to that page, we've got links and we've got the rich text. And so this component's job is to use Tailwind to be styled and to output the rich text and the links, just like we saw before. And that's the beauty of this, because you can build up your arsenal of Lego blocks over time, ultimately come out with a site that looks like Payload. This is just a starting point. This is just the architecture. You want to add your own blocks. I'm going to show you how to do that in the next video. But for now, I just want to explain kind of the moving pieces in the rendering pipeline here. But yeah, so this block has two pieces. It's got the config. What's great is that we can put them in the same folder as well. So if I show you like the folder structure here, we've got, here's our app folder, and here's our blocks, here's our collections, here's our components that are used miscellaneous places. Here's custom endpoints, here's fields, here's the footer, here's the header, here's the heroes. Everything is really nicely organized. And for all of our blocks, each one has its own folder. And each one has two things in there. So if I look at the call to action folder, I've got two things. I've got the config, which is what this is. This defines the block config for payload. This is the backend piece to this block. It's got two fields, rich text field and a link group field. So you have to define the shape of the data. You have to define the fields that you want your editors to use. And then, these fields are going to be different on a block by block basis, right? Media just has a media field. Call to action has content and links. Archive has intro content, populate by collection or individual selection, collections to show, categories to show, limit. Content has columns. Each one of your blocks will have its own fields. And so the first thing in one of these folders is the config right here, where you define the fields. And then the second thing is the React component that goes with those fields that renders it on the front end. And so with those two things, you can build a very, very expressive system over time. What that looks like for you when you go to build your own website from this template is you want the backend piece, the config, and then the component, the thing that renders the data. And it's all bundled up in this nice little folder architecture here. So those two concerns, and then you're done. Go to banner, same thing. The banner has a style field, info, warning, error, success, it's required, defaults to info, and it has the content. And just with those two fields, we go back over to that post that I was showing. Here's the banner block. Right there. And so this render blocks just goes and grabs the right block and it passes it the props and it renders out that component, the corresponding component. Done. And so this type of block-based layout mentality is really nice for pages where the layout is very expressive, right? Very full screen. Each page looks different. Going back to our website, we have like all kinds of crazy different blocks and very versatile layouts and all this stuff. But then if we go to the blog, well, each one of these blog posts kind of looks the same, right? Like it's kind of more templated. It's got a long scrolling center like alignment here. And so you don't really need that full power of layout building on posts, but you do need it on pages, right? So that's kind of how this is set up. And that's why there's, like, if you go to the posts collection, it's going to be different, but pages content is built with a layout builder. You don't have to do that. You could do everything with a rich text field. You could do everything with layout blocks. Doesn't really matter. This is kind of our suggested way of working, but you can take that and run with it. Okay, so on that note about the differences between pages and posts, I do want to go through posts quickly. I think you've got the ground kind of ideas with looking at pages, but why do we do different things for pages and posts? And how do posts work where pages have that layout builder? Posts just have this one big rich text field, right? I mean, it's all kind of a simple concept, but I do want to walk through that really quickly. So here's our pages, right? In our app folder, we have the slug, which is kind of like a catch-all, and it's going to render pages based on slug. But then inside the posts folder, if I go to the front end, I show you the posts folder. Well, first, we're going to render this archive. And then second, we're going to render an individual post. So posts slug, right? And so how does that work? Well, we have a posts folder in Next.js, which is what creates that URL structure. So having that folder called posts corresponds to this. Anything after posts is going to go inside of this folder and be rendered in here. So we have the slug. This is that catch-all route for the slug of the post, just like we have the pages, but here it's going to do something different. And then we have the root. So posts, so slash posts is going to go here, but slash posts slash my post or whatever is going to go here. And those are different, right? So this is the archive. So here it is right here. And we're going to go get many posts. We're going to get 12 posts. And then we're going to output an H1 for posts. And then we're going to output the range component. And we're going to output a collection archive, which is a shared component. And then we have a pagination component. But here we're getting 12 posts, right? In the page example thus far, I was only getting 1. Here we're getting 12 because we're making this archive, that home page right here. So we've got the H1, then we've got the range, then we've got the archive. And we don't have pagination because we don't have more than 3 posts, but pagination would show up down here if we did. And so that's kind of this. I'm not going to go into each one of these components because I want to talk about something in specific, but here, like, this is fully typed, right? So collection archive, you can just map over the posts and output a card for each post. Real easy. But the magic is that this page will fetch the posts and then render them. Now, we are forcing this one to be static and revalidating every 10 minutes, looks like. But if we go to one of these posts, that's going to be here. So this is very similar to the pages rendering with a couple specific differences. I'm going to cover generate static params and static site generating in the next video where we talk about optimizing and making sure that things are fast. But right now I just want to talk about the rendering. So a lot of this is going to be pretty similar, right? Getting draft mode, do we need to get the newest copy of this post or do we need to get whatever has been published? We're going to share that function again because we need that post data in both the React component and the metadata. This function looks exactly the same. Give me 1, pass it draft, override access based on if you're in draft mode or not, don't need pagination, and give me posts where slug equals the slug that I asked for. So this is all very, very similar at this point. We're just getting different collection data. And then what we do to render this stuff is different as well. We do have to manage the redirects for this page as well. You know, that's pretty typical stuff. We do have to render the live preview listener because this is a completely different file than the other one, right? So there is kind of a little bit of duplicity there. I don't know if that's the right word. I think it is. But then from here, we have one post hero. We don't allow for multiple different hero styles on a post. It's just this one. No matter what post you go to, it's going to be the same post hero. Different content, but the same hero, right? And so there we know, hey, let's just send it. That's all we need. Pass the whole post, and we're good. And then this hero doesn't do anything surprising. It's going to render out the categories. It's going to render out the H1 of the title. If it has authors, it's going to format the authors and output the authors. If it has published at, we're going to output the published at time. If it's got a hero image, we're going to output media. And then let me turn this on. Let's see, where's the rich text? Did I skim over it? Oh, this is just the hero. Yeah, this doesn't even have the rich text in it. This is just the hero. So right there, that's going to render this first thing on the page. If I go here, it's going to render this. But then below that, we've just got 2 more components to go. We already talked about rich text. Posts are easier because it's just one long flowing post. So it's just one rich text component. And you can see this is why it's kind of nice to have the layout builder for the pages, because there's more expression going on. There's more versatility. But then for a post, you just, boom, go to town. One rich text field and you're done. And then if we want to render related posts, I think if we go over to the CMS here, Meta has related posts. So if we want to render out these related posts at the bottom, like this, then we should be able to do that. But this rich text, in Payload, rich text is very powerful. So you might have code blocks, you might have like crazy like comparison charts or tables or all kinds of rich text stuff that you want to like show in your posts. You can have a custom rich text renderer that makes it so that your post can still have blocks, but you actually use those blocks inside of the rich text. I can drag this around, and better yet, I can go to live preview and do that. Let me drag that around. Okay, now it's in the middle of that headline and paragraph. Boom, back up the top. Let's pop this over to a warning. This is demonstration purposes content. Okay, cool. We get it. Move that back down here. I don't know why our blog posts, the seed data comes with content about money. I'm going to change that. By the time you watch this video, maybe we'll have changed that. I don't know. It should be about like space or something. Talk to me about quantum physics, not money. All right. Yeah, so one rich text editor. I think that's much better of an editing experience for posts, and that's kind of why our blog, like our out-of-the-box blog, just uses that one rich text component. But you can actually add your own blocks here. Like this template shows you how to do that. So if I close all these files and I show you collections posts, this is very similar to what we looked at with pages, right? But it's got different fields. It still has a title field, just like pages. But we know we need a hero image. We don't have a hero tab anymore because that's not even relevant. We know that we need a hero image. This is like the featured image for all you WordPress fans. But then we have a rich text field. And this rich text field has a blocks feature. You can customize which features of lexical you want to use per field. So this lexical field lets you choose from blocks. And you can see these blocks, we just pass them to this array here. These blocks are the same as the blocks for the pages. They've got a back-end structure, the config, and you've got the front-end component. But you can see here for the content of a blog post, you get some more powerful features here. You get the blocks feature. You can choose between headings. You can tell which headings you want enabled and which ones you don't want enabled. So let's go look at that. This rich text editor has more stuff. I can go here and type in /banner. Bam, new banner. I can't do that in pages. Let me show you that. I can go over to pages. Let's go to that call to action. Banner doesn't exist here. I can do like headings and stuff, but I can't do a banner. That's cool. You can take your blog and you can make a very explicit editing experience that's still very fully featured without compromising on the ability to use blocks. But it just makes more sense to, you don't really need the whole layout builder there. Let's just use one rich text field. And then you can customize it as you will. So to take that one step further, I'm showing you how blocks are very powerful in Payload, and they're kind of the same concept, but you can use them for the blocks field or you can put them into lexical. Blocks are like a layout builder, basically. Well, there's one more cool thing about this that I want to quickly show. I don't want to go too far into it. I think it's pretty self-explanatory if you've gotten this far. But forms. Here's a form. And I know I showed you the contact page, but this is all fully handled inside a Payload. Everything. And this form uses blocks. These fields are blocks. That's it. When I want to edit this form, I want to add another field, let's say like a country field. Boom, right there. That's a block. And the way that we render forms, if I go and I show you the form block, let's see, We have a relationship field to a form. So if I go to the page contact and go to the content, we have a form block. And here you just choose which form you want to render, and then you can add some content if you want. And then this form, you have the data on the front end when you go to fetch this page. And then for that form, here's the fields. Then here's the component. And it's got more stuff. I mean, looking into this, this is a whole video of its own, but this uses React Hook Form, which is a great library. And it's going to do similar things to what we did when we rendered blocks. So we're going to map over the fields. We're going to grab that field from the list of fields. And guess what? That is maybe in a different file, fields. Yep, that looks familiar, right? Same principle as what we were doing with the layout builder of the pages. We're also doing that for form fields. Where did I go? I am losing it. Okay, map over the fields, grab the field. If we have one, render it, spread the props. It's going to show up on the page. That builds a fully dynamic form builder. All you have to handle is submitting the data and sending it to payload. And we also gave you all of that code. So like the rendering here is pretty simple. Now that you've got the thinking behind how to render blocks and all that stuff, well, you do the same thing with field inputs for a form. And then you have a handle submit function, right? Which that's this up here on submit. And we just make a fetch to payload with the form data. And it's a post. And there we go. So it's a fetch. This could be a server function. I think we should change this over to being a server function. I think I'm going to get that updated for you. There's no sense in making a fetch. I mean, we do have the API out, the endpoint opened, but we might as well just make this a server function. But yeah, it's more of the same at this point. I think all these pieces come together so that you define your data in payload. That's step one. You want to make sure the editing experience is good. You want to make sure that you have the right blocks, that each block has the fields that it needs. Make sure that it looks good in the CMS, really nice and easy to use with the different kind of focus areas being tabs or whatever you want to do there. You can use the sidebar, whatever you want to do. Once you have this perfect, then you take that data and then you render it on the front end, right inside that same app folder. So I never have to leave this GitHub. I don't have to go sign into another service or anything. I just do it right here. And that's pretty powerful stuff. It is a lot. This is the future though. This is so much better than working with WP posts and the loop and like querying posts in WordPress and everything. No, this is just React. This is the cleanest that this could ever be. And it's got such a focus on component-based design that once you build that CMS link component or that media block, you've tested that block, you've tested that component, you know it works, then you just use it and you're done and you start flying. So, you know, there is a lot in this template, but it is pretty much there for a reason. You can delete anything you want, of course, but don't let it overwhelm you. Don't let it discourage you. If you're learning about Next.js and about CMSs, and seems like there's a lot here, but once you break it down into the simple different pieces, like the different conventions, it will click for you and then you will move very quickly. You just got to get over that initial hurdle, and I'm going to keep doing videos. I think the next video that we're going to do is going to be on customizing. So adding your own block, building your own block, registering your own block to the payload config, stuff like that. Swapping out the fonts and the logos and whatever you want to do there. We're going to customize it. And then the one after that is going to be about optimizing. So heavily going through everything, making sure that everything is statically rendered. I know I glossed over that in this video, but I want to give it justice. So like we're rendering these as static pages, generate static params. I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to show you how to make sure that your website is statically generated, that it reacts when you click on save in the CMS, then it rebuilds automatically for you. I'm going to talk about all that stuff. I'm going to talk about some of the things we're doing here. We're like select, super cool. I got to tell you about that. And we're going to talk about server components in general. That'll be the next video. And then finally, we're going to talk about deployment. How to take this template and make it go live. So there's a lot of good videos, good content coming out soon. And I'm going to keep my head down and keep making videos. So tell us what you want to see. I know a lot of you have been asking for multi-tenancy. We got a video coming for that. Localization, we've got a video coming for that. Customizing the admin panel. But please keep us in the loop with what you want to see, where you want to see our docs optimized. And we're going to prioritize that over the coming weeks. Thank you.